Hey, so welcome everybody to our Learning Network webinar. My name is Mike Knutson. I'll be the host of this webinar. And our topic today, Economic Development Organization Budgeting. Our guest is Tom Johnson, and I almost have to admit that I feel like it should be a housing topic because several of us are here in Pierre for the South Dakota Housing Development Authority Annual Conference. I bumped into Tom, he's right there as well. But this topic of budgeting is important. We put it on the schedule months ago, and so thanks to everybody for being flexible, and we're working through this. We're all in our each I think rooms, and some people are joining in the lobby down below. So Christy, Andrew, etc. Good to see you all there. All right, so here's our virtual practice reminders. Most of you are all pros at this. You know we want you to participate, so please jump in whenever you can. Unmute yourself and mute yourself when you are not talking. Just take control of that, and we want you to participate as much as possible. Our agenda is pretty straightforward. Here it is. We're just going to do a quick check-in. Tom's going to have the floor. We'll do some Q&A at the end as time allows, and then just some other upcoming events. Now, because we want to make sure that we give Tom time, I'm asking you a one-word check-in question. And I don't know how you all in the lobby are going to pull this off together, but we're going to ask you to give your check-in by offering your name, the community that you represent. This will give Tom a little sense of who's in the room, and then answer what's one word that comes to mind when you think about your budgeting process, what's happening with your budget, anything. What's one word that comes to mind? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Michelle to start the process. Michelle, if you would unmute yourself. You are already unmuted, it looks like, Michelle. And the next person in line, you will see that I ask you, you'll see the flash across your screen that I am asking you to unmute yourself. So take it away, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Juffer. I'm with Wagner Area Growth in Wagner, and one word that comes to mind is opportunity. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Carol Eisenweis with the Freeman Community Development Corporation and City of Freeman. And my word is disconnected.
Jay Buckles, Sioux Valley Energy Community Relations Executive, and my word is just giving input on the budget.
Amanda Anglin, Sturgis Economic Development, and my word is simple.
I'm Ryan Solberg from Lennox Area Development Corporation. My word is first.
I'm Tammy from Dual Area Development, and this is also my first.
Hi everyone, Keisha Bronick. I represent Miller and Hand County, and my word would be exhausting.
Richie Nordstrom, City of Rapid City. Priorities.
Krista Adio Gortmaker, Millbank, Grant County, and scary.
Andrew Van Kuren, Campbell County, representing the towns of Harriet and Pollock in Mountain City. One word is commissioners.
So Krista tells us that Kathy and Rita are also on their way across the parking lot to get here. So
one of them's talking to Dick Werner.
Oh, okay. So we'll just sign off for now. How about that?
Yeah, thanks. Lilia, are you back by now? You had stepped away? Still away, great. And Paula, I know that you're on the phone. Welcome. Anybody else that I missed? Okay. Well, let's just take it to the next step. And before we do, I'd just share as well that it seems like there are quite a few different ways that we think about our budgeting. Some of those comments made me smile. Some of them I could say, yeah, I can relate to that. And some of those is like, I wonder what that means. So maybe we'll have a chance to hear more of that. But I will turn it over to Tom here and allow him to start sharing his screen. And so take it away. Oh, first, I didn't actually introduce Tom because I got going there, but I think most of you already know Tom. He is the president and CEO of Elevate Rapid City. Prior to that, he was out in Wyoming, a business development council, and we got a chance to meet him for the first time, many of us, on a webinar a year ago. I just want to say, Tom, thanks for being willing to jump on, to share, to connect with everybody across the state of South Dakota. We have a principle that we live by in this learning network. We ask for what we need and we offer what you can. And you're definitely offering what you can right now. Please, let's think about how the rest of the network can help you do something. So ask us for something sometime in the future. And Tom, feel free just to start sharing your screen as you're ready. Looking good.
Okay. So Mike, you can see the screen and you can hear me okay? Just want to check that first. Okay, sounds good. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Tom Johnson, I'm the president and CEO of Elevate Rapid City. I think most folks in the state have heard of us by now. We're kind of a new organization, relatively new in terms of its history. We were really established in 2018 as a merger between a Chamber of Commerce Economic Development Organization, two business incubators, development foundation, and then another nonprofit. So there's really lots of about five organizations under one umbrella. And before that, as Mike mentioned, I worked in Wyoming, also worked in Colorado. Some of the words that you had mentioned reminded me of a story when I was running the governor's office of economic development in Wyoming, which was called the Wyoming Business Council, and they're still around. I remember we had a $75 million budget a year, and I think we had 75 employees. And I remember doing our budget stuff back then. And one particular division head came to me and I was having challenges understanding the budget. And I said, well, why did you put this amount here? What was the reason? And she said to me, well, it's just tax dollars. We just had to throw that money in there so we could spend it. Because if we don't put it down there, then they'll want it back. So we'll just throw this money into a category. And I said, well, I get that. I mean, that's not quite the thing I was hoping for. I understand that, but that's not how we're going to run the show here. If you don't have a use for the dollars, that's not your budget. If you have use for the dollars, that is your budget. And I think that sometimes we're guilty, at least when I was in the public sector, of, hey, that was our budget last year, so that needs to be our budget this year. And then the even worse problem was if you got to the end of your budget cycle at a biennium, if you didn't use the budget, you lost it. So there was this mad rush in July or near July, because that's when the fiscal year started, to spend all your money on anything. It could be, I'm going to go to a conference this year. I'm going to do this because you had the money left over. And so you want to try to encourage folks not to do that as well. And I think sometimes in the public sector, we end up just wasting money because of that. So those words that you all said reminded me of some of those stories. But we try to be a little bit better than that in this presentation, and hopefully I encourage you to do that. So let's get right into it. I hope to get right into it here. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So I think we have to admit to ourselves when you're budgeting, it's really just a code for trying to predict the future. It's really a best guess. As over in my career, as I've budgeted, often you'll get asked, about a specific line item or how much did you spend on this? And I think we just have to be as completely transparent as possible and say, listen, this is our best guess at what's going to happen. But we know that predicting the future is hard. It's the same issue that you have when you do strategic planning, frankly. I've been in organizations where we try to do 20-year strategic plans, and that's a nightmare because you can't predict what's going to happen in 20 years. Markets are too complex. The world is always changing. We couldn't have predicted COVID. Many of us couldn't have predicted cell phones. I remember I was part of a group that did a targeted industry study early on in my career, so this has been 20 some years ago. They said, we're going to recruit this kind of industry. And that industry within 5 years had dissipated to China, and it wasn't an industry we wanted to recruit anymore. So I think it's important to just to recognize that we can't predict the future, just like strategic planning. It's hard to predict. We're just not very good as human beings of trying to predict what's going to happen 6 to 9 months out. In fact, there's a book called Super Forecasting that I would recommend everybody buy. It's about making better decisions and about making better forecasts about what's going to happen in the future. And so they've studied people who are world class at trying to predict the future. And what they've determined, and this is pretty scientific at this point, that you really can't predict what's going to happen, much more than 9 months out. It really is a wild guess. And so I think admitting that's okay. So when you're budgeting, I think admitting that to yourself, admitting that to your stakeholders is something that I think diffuses the situation early on. Just saying, hey, listen, this is our best guess. We may have to switch, just like during COVID. We had a budget and COVID hit, and that budget went by the wayside and we had to pivot. And so just admitting that up front and it really, I think, diffuses and also helps your cause too, because it makes you more human. You admit that you're not perfect. You admit that you don't know all the answers. And by saying early on, hey, this is our best guess, I think it helps you get the money. The last thing I would point out is that by locking yourself in and saying our budget absolutely has to be this, you're not being very agile. And so I would encourage you not to do that. There's several options when it comes to budgeting, and I've used all three. I'll tell you which ones I like the best and which ones I like the least and which ones we're going to talk about today. But the three at this point, when you're in this sort of nonprofit/government sector, there's the zero-based budgeting, which I have used before, and I got to tell you, I don't like it much at all. And it's getting a lot more traction now too in an era in which, especially here in Western South Dakota or in my time in Wyoming, very conservative legislators, very conservative politicians. We took a run several times at doing zero-based budgeting, and that is basically starting each year as if there's no history behind your budget. So last year's budget didn't matter. We're going to assume that every one of the items and categories in your budget are zero, and you'll have to make a reasonable argument as to why you need the budget. So we're going to act as if there's really no historical context. You're going to have to basically start from square one every year. It sounds good in principle, guys. It really sounds great if you're a politician. You know, we're tightening the screws to these government bureaucrats, or we're making sure these nonprofits prove themselves to us. But it's really not efficient, and it doesn't really deal with reality that a lot of budgets are based on historical context, and history is a good base from which to generate your current revenues on your current projections for incomes or expenses as well. So I'm not a big fan of that. I've done it. It takes a lot more time. You end up, I think, getting in more fights, having more non-substantive philosophical arguments than you normally would. But again, it's one option, and certainly if anyone has a question about it, we can talk about it today. The second one is more a private sector approach, which is to say, hey, our gross revenues last year were X, so everything's going to be a percentage of that. I've done this with companies. When I was a small business counselor, you get a company in, and when they do performance pro forma projections, they say, okay, our sales last year were 2 million. Our advertising budget last year was 9% of that, so we're going to project 5 years out as a percentage of sales. It could also be a percentage of assets or a percentage of a whole bunch of things, but typically it's a percentage of your gross revenues or sales. This is a little bit more of a private sector approach, but you could use it in the public sector. You could say last year our grant income and membership income, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, was X, so we're going to just do our advertising budget as a percentage across the board. You would probably bring out some RMA ratio statement studies and look about what your peers are doing as a percentage of gross, and you'd use that. Happy to talk about that again today if anybody wants. The third way, and this is the one that I'm going to be showing you and talking most about, is using history as a basis and adjusting for current conditions. And in the book Super Forecasting, that's what good forecasters do. The best forecasters in the world use history as a baseline, and then they adjust for what's happening in the market now. So if you're trying to figure out if a certain country is going to go to war with another country, you would look at the last 5-10 years. Have they been to war? Have they done this? And then you would use what's going on in the market as a way to inform your basis. And that's really, scientifically speaking, what the best forecasters have done, and the ones that are most successful, they do. They use a baseline, and that's what they go from. And so when I budget, I try to use that. Sometimes you may not have history as a budget, frankly. When Elevate was formed, they did not have a history. And so you didn't really have history as a good benchmark. So you had to sort of use sort of a zero-based option for early on. But now that we do have a history, it's a little easier, and I like to use history as the benchmark. A couple other general guidance options is to be better it's better to be conservative than optimistic, but at the same time, you need to ask for what you need. Those things seem to contradict each other. So let me spend a little bit of time talking about what I mean there. When I say conservative, I mean mostly on expenses. So, and revenues too. So you don't want to be overly optimistic saying, for example, last year our revenues from membership was 1.2 million. This year I'm going to say it's 1.5 just because I feel good. You know, I feel optimistic. Budgeting is not a time for feelings, for sure. It's a time for reality. And so you would use the 1.2. And in fact, you might even say, listen, we have a history of seeing drops of about 10%. So I'm actually going to use 1.8 instead of 1.2, even though last year was 1.2. At the same time, you do need to ask for what you need. This is not the time for you to be conservative in asking for what you want in your budget. So if you're about to do a certain program, don't be conservative there. I'll give you a good example right now, and Richie's on this call actually. We're going to go in front of City Council for a request for vision funds for $3 million. Last time we requested 2. The reason we're asking for 3 this time is because we're going to do some more stuff. We've been successful doing X. We think we're going to be successful doing Y, and mostly it's related to housing and workforce. So you have to ask for what you need. If you need your budget to be bigger, you've got to ask for it. You can't get it if you don't ask. And so I think that's sort of a no crap kind of moment, Tom. But I think it's important just to say that. Sometimes I see in budgeting, people, they're just a little bit afraid to ask for what they need, or they'll undershoot their budget when they know they need an extra body. That when you budget and you're asking for revenues, when you're using budgets to ask for contributions, investment, now's not the time to do that. And then finally, if you don't have a history, don't just try to guess. So for example, let's say you're trying to figure out what your utility is going to be. Well, and you don't have a history, you should just call somebody and say, hey, what are your utility bills? Some organization, whether it's private or public, will have an idea of what their utility bills are. So it's better to use something than nothing. Don't just say, well, you know, I think my utility bill is going to be $100 a month. Here you go. You don't ever want to get caught. And I've seen that happen before, where someone just takes a wild ass guess, and the numbers ended up being, you know, triple or quadruple what they thought, and then they have to move something from somewhere else, or they've got to go back and ask for money again. That's the worst thing you can do, is have to go back and ask for money or do another fundraising campaign because you were so subpar in your budgeting. That gets noticed by your stakeholders if you're bad at this. And so best to try to get an estimate from somebody if you don't have it. There's lots of tools out there to use, guys. There's dozens of forecasting tools. You could Google it right now and throw a rock out into the internet and hit one. I would say right now at Elevate, we have a very, very, very complex tool. When you merge 5 organizations together into one, I have a projection tool that is balance sheet, profit and loss, cash flows. I have a tab for payroll and bonus structures, and it's very complex. And of course, I have a master's degree in finance too, so I love financial models that are complex. But the truth of the matter is, for most economic development organizations and chambers, especially in rural areas, and I know, Mike, that's been your focus at Dakota Resources, the simpler is actually the better. And so the tool that I'm going to show you after the talk, the spreadsheet, and I'm happy to send everybody a copy of this or send it to you, Mike, and you can distribute it, is one that I used and helped chambers and EDCs in Wyoming and Colorado as a very simple tool to take to your commissioners or your board. And it allows you to change things on the fly. You'll see, but it's very, very simple. And I think someone had said the word simple in their one-word description before the meeting. And I would say that's a very good way to try to be. When you're going to stakeholders, try to explain the complexities of FICA or your benefit structure. That's not the time to do that. So if you've got a complex model behind the scenes like I do, and you like geeking out on that stuff, knock yourself out in your own free time. But when you're up there presenting, simpler is better. And so that's what I'll show you today. But again, if you want to go complex, we're happy to talk about any of those things. Before I show you the model, let me talk a little bit more about some strategy aspects of budgeting and some things that I've learned and what I would do. Someone talked about this, I think, in one of their one-word description as well, is you got to align the dollars with your metrics. So if you have a mission and your goals from your board are to create jobs, you want to make sure those dollars go to something that does that, right? You don't want to align your dollars with something that might not do that. So I'm trying to think of a really absurd example, and maybe Elevate would be one. Actually, I can think of my time in Wyoming. We had a program and a division that was agribusiness when I was at the state of Wyoming, and one of their goals was to increase revenues for producers. And they were spending a significant amount of money on a coloring book contest and a photograph contest across the state. Now it was fine, and it was fun, but the money was being spent in a place that wasn't being aligned with the mission statement of the metrics. And so we had to cut those programs. As much as I like coloring books, we had to cut those programs because they weren't aligning with the metrics. And so spend the money where the metrics is. That might be a no nonsense, kind of a dumb moment for everybody on the call, but you used to be surprised how often budgets aren't aligned with the actual goals. So if your board has goals and a mission statement, align those dollars there. And for public dollars too, I try to use performance-based metrics and contracts instead of just saying, hey, city, give me some money because I'm economic development or I'm a chamber of commerce. You're not a charity. And so I tend to approach the public sector with, hey, why don't we do a contract? So just like any business that has a contract, we perform. You're making an investment. And so there's a contract with metrics instead of just coming every year to your county commissioners or your city or your state and just saying, hey, give us money because we're the agency that does economic development or community development or business development or chamber work. Don't do that. That puts you in the same category as the United Way. And if you think of yourself as the United Way, or if you have the public elected officials or stakeholders thinking of you as just another donation that they think of when they think of giving money to the United Way, you've put yourself in a place that I think puts you on the cutting block when people start to cut. And you don't want to do that. You want them to think of you as a business that performs, and businesses that perform have contracts. And so those contracts can be, hey, we agree to do X, Y, Z. There's a whole bunch of templates out there we could talk about, but I would encourage you to do that. Another thing I would do is, and we've done this at Elevate, sometimes better than not, sometimes worse, is change your language from membership to investment. Again, you are not the United Way. You're not a charity. You don't want your members to think of themselves as a membership that they can just drop. They're an investor. And what do investors get? They get an ROI. So we've done at Elevate, and I've seen this across my career, when you start to reframe the language around your membership, and this is particularly true when I talk to chambers, when chambers start to change their language from membership to investors, it almost invariably changes the frame that the people, how they think. And so you now begin to, I found revenues start to go up because it's no longer something that I'm going to give at the end of the year in my marketing budget. It's an investment I'm making in my community and an organization. Another thing I would encourage you to do, and I'll show this in a second, is to use a tiered dues model for anybody out there that is using a sort of a fair share model. And this is particularly true in the chamber world. If you're using a fair share model, I would say get away from that. A fair share model is one in which you pay by the size of your business. So if you have a small business, they have 4 employees, they might pay $200. And if you got a big business that has 500, they might pay $50,000. I would encourage you to get away from that. What it does is it forces your investors to often, I don't say lie to you, but they tend to fudge the numbers, right? So they don't want to pay as much. So they tend to say, I don't have that many employees. And it's just not a good way of treating customers. The nonprofit and public sector need to think of themselves more like the private sector. And the private sector gets stuff done, and they do it on behalf of clients and customers. And your customers are not all the same. In fact, you need to learn to segment them instead of thinking of them as just all the same client, except with bigger or smaller employee counts. And I'll show you that in a second. Mike, I might need to go find my water here in a second that I have in the room so I can wet my voice here. But the last point I'll make before I go grab water in like 10 seconds is consider a 5-year pledge campaign or a 3-year pledge campaign versus every single year, because that's going to allow you more time to do your actual job. At Elevate, we have a 5-year campaign, and then a tiered due structure that allows people to pay annually as well. But we try to get as many people committed to a 5-year pledge versus a 1. And now with accounting rules the way they are, this is a much more serious pledge. It used to be in the old days, if someone said, oh yeah, I'll give you 5 years of pledges, they didn't have to claim that as something on their balance sheet. Now you do. If you sign a pledge and you say you're contributing to a nonprofit, that's going to go on our books as a receivable, and you're also stuck with that too, and you're on your book. So it's a much more, I think, nuanced way. One might call it clever. Tom, you might be saying you're clever, and I guess I am being a little clever here. It's a way to build commitment, because that's a 5-year commitment. That's on not just a commitment from a verbal standpoint to your face. It's literally a commitment on the balance sheet as well. So I would encourage you to do that. So Mike, if it's okay with you, I think it'll take me 20 seconds to find my water. I know the water bottle's sitting in the room here, so just give me just a second. And I'm losing my voice already, guys. Here, 1 second.
That's all right. That's all right. And everybody, I just encourage you to be thinking a little bit about the questions that you might have. I've got a few phrases already that I really have appreciated in talking about here today. And it's just nice to be ready. So Tom, it looks like you found that water.
I did.
Right there. There it is.
Who knew that I actually put it in the refrigerator where I wanted it? So thank you. Okay, let me talk about tiered dues. So I said encourage a tiered dues model. Let me actually show you what that looks like. And I would love to take credit for this, but this is something I learned from a really smart consultant named Kyle Sexton, who specializes in this nationally. And he taught me this, and I really loved it when I saw it, and I still think it's really the best thing I've learned in the last 2 or 3 years about how to think about your customers. So when you have investors, whether it's a city, the county, private sector, and that's typically what you have in a nonprofit world, right? We've got public-private partnerships. Most of us get money from the county. Most of us get money from a city. Most of us get money from the private sector as well. It's a public-private partnership. It's best to think of your investors as customers that are segmented. So you'll see 2 axes here in this slide. Let me spend a little time on the x-axis first. So on the left, you'll see the word invested, and on the right, you'll see the word involved. And what that means is you have investors on a spectrum. Some of them have more money to give, and they're more interested in giving you money. Some of them have more time to give you, so they're more interested in being involved. And so you have to slot all of your investors along that spectrum. We have businesses, for example, in Rapid City that are invested in us, like a Black Hills Energy. They give us a significant contribution each year, but they don't necessarily want to be involved. So we slot them along those that axis. Then if you look at the y-axis, at the top you'll see get something done. At the bottom you'll see get something from. Your investors also fall along that spectrum as well. So some of your investors want to get something done through your organization. Like they might want to see job creation. So they want to see something get done through you. Other investors want to get something from you. And you've probably all had this experience, any of you that have ever done this work, whether it's EDC work or chamber work or any kind of work, frankly. You go out to that small mom and pop, right? And you say, hey, join the Mitchell Chamber or join the Mitchell Economic Development Organization. You know, it could be anywhere USA. And what do they say to you? I'm sure you've all heard this, right? They say, well, what are you going to do for me, right? That's the kind of person we're talking about. They want to get, if they're going to join or become an investor in your organization, they want to get something for it. So a lot of the smaller mom and pops, the reason that many chambers struggle getting a lot of them or getting them to retain is that they're always saying, hey, what do I get for being part of the chamber? What do I get? What do I get? What are you doing for me? So it's helpful to put your investors on that spectrum. And so what you get when you slot your, let's say you have 100 investors, you slot 100 on the X and the Y, they tend to go into those 4 categories. At the top left, these are investors who have more money and they want to get something done through you. They're more of the value signal investors. They're the big community mission funders. So this for us would be, at Elevate, it would be the Black Hills Energy, the hospitals, utilities, the city. They're about finding jobs and making the economy go and helping out regulations and finding workforce and talent. They're the ones that are more concerned with your mission. They're going to be the ones that give you the most money, and they're going to be the ones that want to see you do stuff, but they're not going to be the ones that necessarily come to a mixer or come to an event or come to your annual meeting, because that's more about volunteerism and being involved. So that's one set of investors. And you'll see in the next slide how we treat each one of these investors. You want to have different benefits for each kind of investor. So don't treat your all 100 investors the same. The benefits for the ones in the top left here are going to be different than the ones at the bottom tier. Why? Because those investors want something different from you. Now, I'll spend some time. So I spent some time on the top left. Let me spend some time on the bottom right, and then I'll move on because you can read the slide yourself. The bottom right, these are folks, again, that want to get something from the organization, and they have more time. So they're going to give you less money, but they're going to give you more involvement and volunteer work. And what do they care about? They're about business leads. They're about going to mixers and hugging it out and connecting, and about personal visibility. They want low cost opportunities. Why do you think they come to their mixer? Because they want to get leads at a low cost. They want to spend $10 to go find clients. So what we do, again, is we tailor our benefits to the different segments. So if I go out and talk to somebody that's in that bottom right quadrant and I say join or invest in Elevate, I'm going to get them in at a different level, and I'm going to give them different benefits than I would for somebody like Black Hills Energy or the city, who's more concerned about job creation. I'm going to pitch them differently. The benefits that I give them are going to be different. I could spend more time, Mike, on the top right or the bottom left, but you get the point, right? Each one of your investors is going to be slotted somewhere in there. And let me show you how this works at Elevate. So this is our tiered due structure. So I just took this and turned it into what we actually do. So I'm not afraid to share this with people. These are our levels of investment. So you'll see at the bottom right there, our classic, when we merged the chamber, we had a lot of chamber investors that were under $500. And we still have a few of those. We're trying to upgrade them, but our basic membership is $500. And we can talk too about, how do we set these numbers? That's more of a detailed question. But our basic membership is Black Hills. They're in that bottom right quadrant. We know what they want. The benefit structure and what we sell them is going to be XYZ, A, B, C, D, E. They're going to be different than the membership at the Kilimanjaro level. So we use a theme. We're elevating the Black Hills, elevating Rapid City. So our theme is about elevation. So we picked a mountain range strategy. One could argue whether that branding is good or not, but our Black Hills membership is our lowest. Then we move over to Teton, then up to Olympus at 3, Rainier at 5, Kilimanjaro at 10. And then if you want a board seat or be on our executive committee, it's $20,000 to $50,000. And I'm sure a lot of you out there, and I would have balked at this too early on in my career when I was working in rural areas. These numbers seem crazy high, but they're not. And if you do this right, and you actually can show the value of the benefit package to the investors, we get upgrades every week from the $500 to the $3,000 or the $5,000, because there's different benefits that we offer in these different classes, because we treat them like different kinds of consumers. They're not all on a spectrum like a fair share model. So this is the one that we use. Yours might be a little bit different for your area. You might have different themes. You might have different numbers. You can see in the right also, we show you what our average benchmark is. So we take the total revenues that we get each year divided by the total number of investors, and that's our benchmark. The reason we do that is it's a psychological trick. When we go out and show you what our average benchmark is, we want to get you above that. So we'll say things like, if you come in at those lower levels, that's not really even at our benchmark. Our average investor is at that other level. So it sends a psychological signal that you want to be over that. You don't want to be below the average, right? No one wants to be below average. And your investors don't either. So we give them the opportunity not to be below average by putting that benchmark in. Again, a little bit clever, but that's what we do. So I'm going to get to the questions page, Mike, but the last part of this presentation is for me to stop sharing this screen and then share this spreadsheet with you, which I'll do now. So I'll actually share the tool with you. Mike, could you give me a thumbs up if you see the spreadsheet? Yeah, okay. So this is a simple one that I created. I can give you a more complex one if you'd like. I doubt you do. But what this allows you to do is several things in one place. I would say the first thing is anything in blue, you're fair game to type in. That's the stuff you change. Anything that's in black, that text, that gets filled in for you, and you don't have to fill it in. It allows you to put your historical statements in, and then it also allows you to project. So I'm going to just walk you through one line item. So let's say the city, and you can see I've got operating income that I can change. All these things in blue, if you have different operating incomes, profit centers, you can put them in there. Notice I have one that says other. I have your standard economic development chamber revenue streams, grants, events, city, county, private, release from restrictions. I have all the standard stuff, but I'll just walk you through one. So for example, let's say the city gave me, $50,000 in 2019. And then in 2020, again, these are historical numbers. They gave me another 50, or let's say they gave me 60, sorry. Notice what that did. The percentage got filled in, the historical percentage, so I can see what that growth rate was. Now I go to 21, and let's say that number went up to 70. Just type it in there. It shows me my growth rate from 19 to 20, which was 20%, and then from 20 to 21, which is 16. Then what it does is something I think is pretty cool. It fills in all your budget for the next 5 years going forward. And then it allows you to change things from there by percentage. So let's say I want to go get another 10% from the city. Watch what happens to that number now. I type in the 10, it goes from 70 to 77. Or I could use 25% if I wanted to be a little bit freaky. It's up to 87, and then it goes on from there. So I can go to each year, and if I just wanted to adjust for inflation, I could use a 3%. If I wanted to keep my budget the same for those 5 years, I could use 0. So you can see, Mike and everyone, I can do this with any profit center. And again, I won't bore you by going through each line item so you can see, but I can go through any one of these and show you what that looks like for each of these next 5 years. And it allows you to change the years too up here. So let's say, 5 years from now, you said, I remember a speech from some dumbass guy in Rapid City. I got a spreadsheet. What do I do here? You can type in 2025 and you can just be historical, right? So it fills that in for you, gives you the name of the company, anything in blue again, and then it fills it out at the bottom. Come down to expenses, same thing here. You can change any of these expenses, type in your own expenses. I have your typical ones from accounting to payroll to printing to travel and utilities. I'll just walk you through one real quick. Let's say my utility bill last year was $1,200, or in that year it was $1,200. Then it was at $1,250, and then it went up again to $1,500. That last year sets my baseline. And then on expenses, I encourage you always to use an inflation factor, because inflation's real, as we all know, especially in the last 6 months. So somewhere between 3 and 5 would be one I would use. I've done this throughout my career. To be conservative, I'll use sometimes 5%. But you can see I can go to 3 easily for the next 5 years, and it'll fill that in for me. Then down at the bottom, it gives you a chance to, and by the way, I'm using the language of the nonprofit sector versus private. In the private sector, you wouldn't call this a statement of activities, you call this a profit and loss statement. But because I'm assuming a nonprofit sector here, I'm using statement of activities, and I'm using change in net assets at the beginning of the year and net assets at the bottom of the year, at the end of the year. In a profit and loss, that would be your beginning profit and your ending profit. And this fills this in for you. It takes the ending profit, for example, this year, 608,926, and it carries it over to the next year, and then it adds or subtracts to get your net assets from your next year. So Mike, I don't think I need to spend too much more time on this. It's a pretty simple way to budget. How happy to send this to you. If you want to be more complex, knock yourself out. We can get you those kind of things. If you're a financial nerd, happy to send you those things. But for me, I found that the simpler, the better. I like this too because it shows your city council, your stakeholders, the historical aspects and the projections going forward at any point in time if you'd like. And it's a simple way of doing budgeting that allows you to control the flexibility in each year or keep it the same depending on how you change those percentages. So Mike, I think I'll probably stop there and take any questions. But again, just so you know, I'll send you these slides. I'll send you the spreadsheet and you can tweak it how you'd like, but you can do what you want with it. So with that, I think I've taken about 40 minutes, Mike. I hope I have some time for some questions.
Great. Well, I've got one right away, and now we'll open it up to everybody. But mine is, do you share that 5-year template with your stakeholders, with your city council, with others?
Yes. I'm always a guy that likes to be as transparent as possible. I feel like it disarms people when you show them the reality and just be as honest as possible. And so by showing the history and then showing what you're trying to do in the future, that there's a disarming aspect about saying, hey, I'm real. Here's what we've been doing in the past, guys. Here's what we're going to be trying to do. This is why this budget went up. You're not trying to sneak anything past them. Richie can tell you right now, we're going for the $3 million of vision funds. And in my budget, I'm clear as to we're going to spend this money on X for housing, for workforce, because we know it's a big need right now. And this is what we're going to try to do. So yeah, we absolutely try to share it with the stakeholders. But again, the trick is to make sure who the audience is and how much time you have. If you only got 10 minutes with a city council, I would probably just show them a summary. If I have 30 minutes though, I'd probably show them this and just let them see how I've come to these kind of conclusions.
Nice. Continue on. Other questions? Is this something that's a little more, are you stepping forward?
Oh, sorry, Mike, I'm supposed to look at the questions?
No. It looks like Christy is jumping in or not. I can't quite figure out what's going on there. And so.
Well, we're having a conversation here and then we're all saying, well, Tom's here, so we'll just talk to him. But then what I'm saying is, but then nobody else learns from that if you don't ask the question. So Lori, ask the question.
You can re-ask it tonight over a beer too, if you want. But
increasing the memberships, or the 5-year thing.
Oh yeah. Okay. So you got your yearly membership, and then how much do you increase that by to do the 5-year pledge?
Do you just have your memberships as they are and you just ask them for a 5-year pledge at that level? Or do you discount it? Or do you increase it times 5? Or
yeah, great questions. The answer is there's no right answer, but there's preferences. So with a pledged campaign, when you're going out and saying, hey, I'd like a commitment for 5 years, the simpler the better. So I would probably tend to say, hey, we would like a contribution from your business, or we'd like you to invest at the 500,000 number, and we divide that by 5 years, so 100,000 a year for 5 years. That's probably simple for them to understand versus saying, hey, I'd like you to invest at 525 because each year I'm going to adjust your revenues by 3% for inflation. It's just a simpler conversation to have. The business understands just numbers. Also, you don't have to have conversations around, I mean, with the time value of money, 5 years from now, I'm going to have to discount the safe rate of return for government bonds. This is why it's 525. They zone out with that kind of conversation. So I tend to just do those numbers over 5 years. The goal, though, Christ, of course, in your mind, you know what you're going to need. So you might say 525 instead of 5 because it's an easy number for you to understand. You divide it by 5. But there's no right way to do it. I think the simpler approach is the better way. You're going to have people that resist the 5 years. You're going to have people that come in at 5 years. And so with them, what you do is you get the 5-year pledges, and that's gonna happen for 5 years, and then you got your 1-year folks that just come in every year and they do their annual dues. So you probably heard that word before. That's where you send out either me or our investor relations director to have a meeting with them once a year, or you can call it a BRE visit, business retention and expansion visit. And that's when you have that conversation. Hey, we'd like you to upgrade. And here's all the great things you can do if you upgrade from here. So you get a chance every year to have those conversations with those 1-year one-offs about upgrading. And so we've had pretty good success with that. Those that haven't committed for 5 years, we have a business retention and expansion visit, and we happen to mention at the end of that the possibility to upgrade, and here's the upgrade opportunities. And so we can get them upgraded from 1 to 3 or 3 to 5 or something like that. So simpler is better on the 5-year approach.
There's a follow-up question.
Yep.
Do you have a list or printout or something that shows exactly what you do at each of these levels?
Yes.
For the company?
Yeah, we have a PDF we can change on a dime. What you don't want to do is print up a bunch of slick brochures and then have 180 of them, and then you have to change 3 months later because you thought, oh God, we should offer this benefit because I talked to so and so. You want a PDF that's flexible and that you print them as you go because you might change a benefit as you go. And so you can print, 5 to 10 or 20 at a time to do that. But yes, every level or tier we call it here has a very specific set of benefits. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Let's say you come in at the 3rd tier, you get all the benefits of the 1st tier stacked with the 2nd tier, and then additional benefits of the 3rd. So you're stacking the benefits, of course, but knowing where those folks are going to be on those quadrants, we make sure that 3rd tier is speaking to them, and we'll just mention, oh yeah, hey, you get those other benefits too. I know you don't really care about those, but you still get them. So for example, you might get tickets to an event or something at this tier, and they might not even care about that, but they do get that access to them if they want, because that's part of the stacking. You want to stack the benefits on top of each other. So if you're at the 50,000 level, you're on our board. You essentially bought your way into our board. I don't say it like that in public, but that's what you did. But you stack those levels of all the benefits all the way down. They get all that stuff.
So
but yes,
Tom,
we do have a sheet.
Is another purpose behind a multi-year pledge twofold. One is then you know that you have that member at that level for at least that level for 5 years for budgeting purposes. Second of all is, yes, you need to go back and visit with them, have conversation or, the relationship part of it. But again, you don't have to, that you can expect that level of every annual giving, right?
I think that's right. Absolutely right, Christy. It's twofold. You said it. I'd probably say it a little bit differently, but you said it right. When you commit for 5 years, I've got you. And I don't mean I've got you. I've got the ability to plan the organization's future for 5 years and hit our goals. So with Elevate Rapid City, we've got 5-year goals to get X jobs and wages up by that. I want to make sure that I can tell my staff of talented people and professionals that we've got the budget to do that program of work for 5 years, because economic development is not just a 1-year thing, right? We all know this. Economic development is a long-term process. It's never done. You're never stopping economic development. So you get that 5-year commitment because the stuff you're trying to do takes about 5 years. But yeah, the sort of trick there is that you do get them committed for that 5 years. If you actually go back on your commitment, it is an accounting. You have to write that off, and it's not great for you from an accounting perspective. So it really is a little bit more of a commitment than saying, yeah, I'll join the chamber every year and do my annual dues. It's a commitment for 5 years for our program of work. We have a 5-year program of work. And in fact, I'll show you, actually, I should share the screen real quick. I meant to do this. This is our, This is our 1 year. So we have a 5-year program of work, and we divide it up into 1 year targets. So we're pretty serious about being a performance-based organization. You can see our 5-year goals down at the bottom left. Those are our 5-year actual goals that the board set. Our missions on top here. And then each one of our divisions has a purpose. So you've heard the statement start with the why. We have a why, we have a why for our organization. That's our mission statement. We're here to elevate the region for everyone. But each one of our divisions has a why as well, said in very short words. So we've got a purpose, each division, including operations and marketing. And then we've got targets and outputs for each year. So I learned this early on after reading a lot of books about John Wooden. He often would have the most talented team and he would lose. And sometimes he would have a mediocre team and he would win. And he wanted a way to be successful in his career without, in the light of sometimes losing with the most talent. So you want to measure outputs and outcomes. So we do both. We have targets and goals that we're trying to hit. So for example, you can see we're in 2021 trying to attract 5 new businesses to Rapid City, expand 5 businesses, create 200 plus jobs. That's the stuff that sometimes we can't control. You can't always control if a company is going to choose your area. We had just last month somebody choose an area over Rapid City because of a personal, emotional decision, not anything I could control with taxes or sites or anything else. So you can't always control the decision, but what you can control is what you do every day. So you see, we have those targets. We can't always control those, even though we set them. But on the right, you can see my team has a target of they can control visiting with 600 prospects. They can control doing 125 business retention expansion visits. They can control the 10 site visits. So if you have both, you can go to your stakeholders and say, hey, we've got targets that we're trying to hit like hell, and we've got outputs that we're going to do regardless. And if I dial up the volume on my outputs, I should get my outcomes, but I can't always guarantee it. So when I say be performance-based for your budget, this is the kind of stuff we do. This is an exercise we do with the staff and the board and our stakeholders to determine what our goals are going to be. So every division has goals and outputs. We're very performance-based for the money that we get. And I would say that's an important part of it. And so that's just one year of our 5-year work plan. But anyway, to answer your question, Christy, is yes, it gives them that commitment that we've got a 5-year work plan to hit those 5-year goals. And so we need your commitment for 5 years.
All right. Thanks. And so it looks like Richie had posted something into the chat. Richie, would you want to just unmute yourself and share what you were asking or talking about?
Thank you, Mike. Tom, what I'm interested in is priorities. In your example that you put forward here, how do you set up priorities? How do you establish priorities? Because we've been talking about zero-based budgeting, performance-based budgeting, and some other factors, but I think we, the city, has settled on priority-based budgeting, not in depth of like what we've had the experience with that Colorado firm. We really got down deep into the weeds with priority-based budgeting, but how do you establish priorities? And I've got a follow up on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think the simple answer, Richie, is, and you know this because we've talked about it. I think that right now in Rapid City, workforce and housing are significant priorities from economic development and community perspective. And if you'll notice in our 5-year work plan, and that I just pulled up, our 5-year goals for anybody that saw them were jobs, incomes, capital expenditures, and consumer spending. Those were our goals. Those aren't exactly housing and workforce. They relate, but they don't necessarily reflect at the time when Elevate was formed. It was about the job creation. Well, here we are in an environment in which there's plenty of jobs, not as many workers, and they can't find a place to live. And so what do you do about it? I think this is one of the things where by having 1-year work plans, it allows you to be agile. So had we locked ourselves into a 5-year work plan in which the 5 years was the actual work plan and not dividing it up into 1-year segments, we couldn't pivot. So what we can do with these 1-year work plans is like, oh crap, COVID hit, let's pivot this year. Oh crap, housing and workforce hit, we can pivot now because we didn't lock ourselves into a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan like you see some organizations do where they think they can predict what's going to happen. You just can't. It allows you then to pivot. So I think, as you can see in our budget request, Richie, this year, and if you've read the packet, and I know you have because we went through it, you can see that we're spending a significantly bigger chunk of our money on housing and workforce. So we're going to triple our workforce budget from where it was the previous year. And then Richie, I think you and I discussed when I talked to Liz Hamburg too, we're going to hire a housing coordinator with money from us and her because housing is such a big issue. We just need to have a coordinator that handles it all day 24/7. So I think it allows, by having these 1-year work plans, it allows you to be agile. And that's an important point. I didn't spend as much time as I probably should have is, yes, get 5-year commitments, but divide your work plans up into 1-year segments so that you can be agile. And this is something I learned when I was at CSU, when I was the director of community engagement there. And I know, Mike, you've talked to that gentleman as well from Purdue, Ed. There's this concept of strategic doing instead of strategic planning. And one of the things I really took away from strategic doing in my time at CSU was when you live in a really complex world like we do today with many variables and markets that react quickly, you need to be agile, and allowing these 1-year work plans allows you to pivot and be agile. So yeah, Richie, I would say, yes, priorities are definitely a concern, and having 1-year work plans within a 5-year context allows you to be agile. And you see this all the time with government, specifically nonprofit, not quite as much, but with government, they come up with this beautiful, they hire a consultant, they pay the consultant $150,000, $200,000. Consultant puts together a really shiny, nice 10-year strategic plan. And then 2 years later, COVID hits, and you had something that happens in the market, and you got to throw it out the window because now you got to pivot. So I'd rather be more agile than although the consultants probably would rather have you do a 10-year plan.
So Tom, we are up to the end. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, of course. I'll take as much time as you guys need.
Yeah. Hey, I've got a question, and maybe others do, but mine is something that I encounter that I see that people are struggling with. They're doing great work out there in their work, in their jobs. Their board recognizes that they're having success, they're achieving their goals, but they're just a one-person shop, and they feel like to take the next step, they need that next support staff, somebody else, but it's tough to take that next step. What advice might you have to make that happen with a step up in support in the budget? How would you work with the board? What advice do you have?
First, I would say, I've been in a smaller staff situation. I've been always done at big organizations. Seems like it, but not always. So I think I'm giving a talk at Black Hills State University later this month or next month on managing an economic development organization, where I can talk a little more about this kind of stuff. But take advantage of outsourcing you can. Also, there's automated assistance now. So much stuff can get automated. Even something this small, like someone calls your office, they get the automated assistant that says, hey, to get Tom Johnson, press 1. You can actually make yourself look like a bigger organization by saying press 1, 2, because the caller is calling in and they're going to think, oh, to get to Tom, I have to press 1, 2. If it would have just been 1, it's one guy, right? So you can actually make yourself seem bigger through automation. And so you can do things like automated receptionists and these kind of things. So take advantage of all the automation that exists out there. Also, you can outsource, right? You don't necessarily have to hire a full-time body anymore for front desk or for anything in your organization. We contract, we do a nice magazine each month, and I get comments on it all the time. Oh my God, the magazine is awesome. Who's your writer? Well, we contract that work out. And so for like a quarter of the cost of actually hiring somebody, I can get good quality writing for the magazine. So I'd say do that when you can. But the last piece, I think, is really what you're hitting at, Mike, is when you go to that budget and you need that extra person and you're trying to convince your stakeholders that you need it, you absolutely have to show them that by doing this, it's going to allow me to do X. And so you often will see the 1 or 2 man shop, the economic development director or CEO, ends up spending 60% of their time to 75% of their time. This has been studied. It's actually around about 70 to 80% in meetings or preparing for board meetings or just doing the process stuff of keeping the organization going, and they don't actually do economic development. So I think that's the kind of argument you have to make, is that if I get this additional person to do this and responsibility, it frees me up to go do 50 more site visits, 60 more BRE visits, and be very specific in how it's going to free you up to do X, Y, Z. Be as specific as possible, because that really will be like, oh God, okay. The stakeholder will say, well, yeah, who doesn't want 60 more site visits? Who doesn't want 60 more prospect visits, or whatever the thing for you is going to be? You have to be very specific about how it's going to affect you. And so right now, with the housing coordinator, the case that I make to my board for spending the money is it's going to allow someone in the community who's an employer who's trying to recruit someone who can't find housing, a place to call and find housing. So right now we have a couple anecdotal stories, and we have the data that shows right now, if you're a teacher in Rapid City, entry level, you can make it $50,000 to $50,000 at this point. They can't find apartments. So for $50,000 in Rapid City, you should be able to live comfortably. You should be able to find an apartment. They can't right now. They're going to be in that $800 to $1,000, $1,200 range a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. They can't find them. And part of the reason they can't find them is the school system doesn't know who to call. So we're going to hire a housing coordinator, so someone is there to answer the phone and say, okay, you need this. There's a new loft development complex coming on in the next 6 months you don't know about. The reason you don't know about it is because you're not plugged into all these networks like I am. Let me get you in contact with the developer so you can get in line. So hopefully I just demonstrated a reason. If you ask for something, you can say why in specificity. That's the trick to it. Not just because I want more time. You can't. I've seen this happen. I saw an economic developer in Torrington, Wyoming, when I was working in Wyoming. He was a one-man shop, went to his board and asked for an administrative assistant. They said no. And part of the reason he didn't get it is because he said, it'll just free me up. It just frees me up. Well, that doesn't mean jack. Just freeing you up doesn't mean anything. It frees you up to do what exactly? Go have more coffee, go visit more companies. You got to be specific. So that would be my recommendation.
Perfect. Is there any one last question that someone would like to ask?
I would, Mike.
Yeah, go for it, Amanda.
So Tom, when you talked about the, using public dollars and a performance-based contract. So we have a contract with our city, but I'll say it's very vague and loose. And so I guess my question is, we own property, we have leases and land and things like that. So I get my board sometimes gets concerned with the amount of cash that we have on hand, especially like during budget time. It always seems that we've sold a piece of property or a loan was paid back, and now we have, say, $1 million in our account, but we have that earmarked, not necessarily on the balance sheet, but in our minds is this money is going to be turned over into this project. But our investors and stakeholders don't necessarily see that. And then my board gets concerned that, okay, well, the city and the county aren't going to want to give us money because we have this money, even though I communicate with them regularly that we have these projects coming down the pipeline and it's going to use this money. So I guess my question is, how do you maybe incorporate that into a budget or make the board members see that we do need this cash in order to continue our projects and it's not a bad thing?
Yeah, great question. That happens a lot. And public officials, if they see something on your balance sheet, they will, as you know, probably because you've been through this, they'll say, hey, why do we need to give you this when you have this, right? They see it on your balance sheet as cash. I think that's why the contract, you could tighten it up to be really specific. So for example, you might say, okay, I've got a contract with my city that says we will be, your general stuff, right? We're the economic development agency for our county, for our city. Okay, that's in the contract, but get really specific. For the money you're going to give us, imagine yourself as a consultant working for the city. That's really the best way. When I get my frame of my mind right, I think of myself, okay, if I was a consultant and I had a consulting business, what would I do? So in that contract, I would say, okay, I'm going to do this many BREs. I put a number to it. We're going to do this many recruiting projects, or we're going to contact this many site selectors, or you know the routine. You can put numbers to anything. We're going to do. I'm trying to think of one right now. We're going to reach out to so our workforce development division. Again, we have a bigger organization, I understand, but our workforce development talent attraction manager, she's going to reach out and establish that standard HR network club where the HR managers meet every month, and she's going to conduct that. She's going to do 12 of those a month. So be as specific as possible, because then what happens is the public officials tend to say, oh, okay, we're getting that for that. They treat the numbers and the money as factual things that it's exchange of value, versus just saying we're the economic development organization. They don't see the transactional value of that. But if you say I'm going to do X, Y, Z with numbers, then that number they give you and this number over here, they equate those two things with a transactional value. It's a bit of a psychological thing. So that's how you handle the public side, and I think you'll find some good results there. On the board side, that's a little bit trickier. You have to know each one of your board members. Each one of your board members is going to have a different perspective, and you kind of have to know which ones are going to be flare-ups ahead of time, and just kind of blunt that. And so what I've done in those kind of cases, and again, I don't need a specific example in a minute, so we might talk offline, and I might have different advice, but if I know I'm going to have a flare-up with one board member, it's always the same guy. I know who he is. I'm going to make sure my chairman and two other board members go into that meeting with the response. Hey, we all agreed that when we sold this land, we were going to put that land into a new business park. I'm just throwing something out there, right? We all agreed that was going to be the thing. That's not going to be for operations. Our operations are this. This is a reinvestment of this. So we all agreed to this when we got into this. And so it's not you arguing with the board member. It's your chairman and the other board member saying, hey, guys, remember, this isn't really for this. It's for this. And so I tend to have those things kind of lined up. And so that's just a matter of more of a board management approach. And, board managing isn't much different than managing employees or having kids. Each one of them is going to be different. Each one of them is going to be motivated by different things. Each one of them you have to know what makes them tick. I have two sons. One son's going to respond differently to this, and he's going to respond to that. I have 18 employees. Each employee is going to respond to different things. And the board members are no different than that, right? They're each individual humans. They have different agendas for being on your board, different reasons for being on your board. Sometimes they're a self-interest and they're disclosed. Sometimes they're self-interest and not disclosed. But I think you've got to have that ready. And nothing speaks to one board member as much as another board member coming and having that peer-to-peer discussion, because they see you as you work for them. So if you're arguing with them, they're going to tend to think they know more than you because they're up here at the board level. But if you've got that board member who has your back and you know it going in, then it's a peer-to-peer discussion, and you kind of just even sit back sometimes. You don't have to enter the fray. It just happens. Oh, hey, you remember we decided when we sold this land, we're going to put it into our incubator. Or we decided when we sold this land, we're going to put it back into another piece of land because we have to continue to have infrastructure. And then the board members all go, oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. We're not going to use it for operations. That's right. So, but I have seen nonprofits. I almost took a job with a nonprofit in Denver one time. The reason the job was interesting to me is they had a $20 million building and they were going to sell it. And so that meant they had $20 million in money at that point, right? So they were going to turn the building into cash. And so you had a long runway of operating money at that point that they were going to take their asset and turn it into cash. I'm not saying you should do that, but it was an interesting concept. You could do that.
Well, again, Tom, thanks so much for that. I'm sure that, as always, you're willing to visit with people offline and answer other questions, but we really appreciate that. I want to offer up just a couple quick things here as we go. We have some upcoming activities. We have some webinars coming up. You'll notice I want you to all realize that our webinar in the beginning of October is going to be on a different date, on the 7th. So you'll see more on that. We have our gathering coming up on November. Okay, make sure that you're ready for that. And here's a special event. We have our 25th anniversary happening here at the end of the month. Jamie's already placed a link in there for you to all come join us. We're going to be at the brewery in Hartford. We're closing down Main Street. There's going to be a band. We all want you all to come celebrate with us. Get a hotel room, stay in Hartford, stay in Sioux Falls. Come have some fun with us as we celebrate 25 years of our existence. Now, as always, we want to thank our sponsors. Here are our leadership sponsors, Avera, Bank West, I can't even see my screen here, Dakota Bank, the Reed Fund, and also Touchstone Energy, all very thankful for their support. And then as well, we have our championship level sponsor, Citibank, for their support in this learning network. Jamie's put the link into the chat. We always want you to say, what's one thing that's helped you? Fill out that 2-question survey with that. Tom, you know, you're offline right now, but I just offer you the last closing second. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we close it out here?
Mike, just again, thanks for this group and my chance to talk to you from time to time. I appreciate it. Sometimes you feel alone out there in your communities, but having a support group like this is helpful. And if I can be of any service to anybody, I've made all the mistakes that you can possibly make in my career. Still learning every day. So if there's anything I can do to help, let me know and be happy to do it. So just again, thankful to have a support group like you guys. Thank you.
Yeah. And Richie, thanks for keeping Tom out there in Rapid City. We appreciate him. All right. Thank you. And so with that, everybody, we saw the wave, everybody there down in the lobby. Thanks for joining in. I know the others couldn't make it, but really appreciated Tom's time here today. Bye now.